Hey there, ready for a real mind bender? Today, we're going to dive into this wild idea like, what if everything you experience, your senses, your perceptions are all just an illusion?
Yeah, it's a total trip, right. And the even wilder part is this. It's not just some philosophical mumbo jumbo. There's some serious science backing it up.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but color me skeptical.
Hmm.
How can our senses, the things that are supposed to help us survive, be deceiving us?
Well, think about it this way. Evolution isn't really about seeing the world perfectly. It's about, like, survival of the fittest, right? Passing on those genes. It's more about having the right tools to navigate the world, even if those tools simplify things a bit.
So it's not about seeing reality in its raw form, it's more about having the right app, even if it cuts a few corners.
Exactly. Imagine you got this app that takes super complex data and boils it down to these easy-to-understand visuals. It might not be showing you every single data point, but it's giving you the gist, just what you need to make those split-second decisions. Our senses might be doing something pretty similar.
Okay, that's a pretty wild concept. Are there any real-world examples of this kind of sensory shortcut in action?
Oh yeah, tons. One of my favorites is the Australian jewel beetle. These little guys are hardwired to find mates that are like dimpled, glossy, and brown, very specific.
Makes sense. Gotta have standards, right?
Great. Well, here's the funny part. Because of this laser focus, they often end up, get this, trying to mate with beer bottles.
Wait, beer bottles, seriously?
Yep, you heard that right. Those brown, dimpled, shiny bottles totally throw them off. And sometimes they even seem to prefer the bottles over the real deal. Actual female beetles. Evolution, man. It's a wild ride.
Wow. I'm never looking at a beer bottle the same way again. I mean, if they can fall for that, what kind of illusions are we humans buying into? Are you saying our senses might be doing the same thing, steering us towards what helps us survive, not necessarily towards what's actually real?
Bingo. It's like those, what are they called? Oh, yeah, supernormal stimuli.
Yeah.
Things that basically hijack our instincts by, presenting these exaggerated versions of reality. Think makeup, for example, bright red lipstick. You don't see that naturally, but man, it can be attractive because it taps into our primitive responses to color and shape.
Yeah, it's like our brains are saying, whoa, that's a lot of red, must be a healthy mate.
Precisely. And then you've got fast food, engineered to be crazy delicious, right?
Yeah.
It pushes all those evolutionary buttons for craving salt, fat, and sugar, even if it's not the best for us in the long run.
And social media too, right? All those notifications, those pings and buzzes, they're designed to grab our attention.
Oh, absolutely. Social media is a prime example of how our craving for connection can get, well, a little out of whack. Those notifications, they trigger this deep-seated need for social interaction, even if it's just someone liking your cat picture. But here's the real mind blower. How does this sensory illusion idea play into the bigger picture of, physics, the fundamental nature of reality? That's where things get really interesting, because you've got these recent Nobel Prizes in physics, groundbreaking stuff, awarded for research that basically confirms that this thing called local realism is false.
Local realism. Okay, I'm going to need a refresher on that one.
Sure, it's this idea that objects have, like, definite properties, things like position or momentum, even when nobody's observing them. It's like you pause a movie, you assume the movie's still playing, even though you're not watching.
Yeah.
Local realism says that's how reality works, but quantum physics throws that out the window.
So instead of a movie that keeps playing, reality is more like what? A paused DVD?
More like a choose-your-own-adventure book. These experiments, they showed that particles don't actually have definite properties until someone or something observes them. It's like the act of observing somehow, I don't know, influences reality at its core.
Hold on, are you saying the moon literally disappears when we're not looking at it? That sounds like some serious science fiction.
Okay, it's not quite that simple, but the analogy is closer than you might think. Think of it like a massive multiplayer VR game. The game world, with all its objects and landscapes, is huge, but it only fully loads for each player when they're looking in that direction. The moon in that game, it doesn't exist on some central server as this physical object. It's more like a set of possibilities that are rendered when a player's avatar sees it.
So you're saying our consciousness is kind of like the player in this VR game, and our senses are the headset, showing us this limited, curated version of a much larger, more complex reality.
You got it. And just like in those VR games where the lines between real and virtual get all blurry, we might be mistaking the limits of our perception, our own personal headset, for the true nature of reality itself.
Whoa. Okay, that is a lot to unpack. So, if we're not just brains in a physical world, then what are we? What is this larger reality we're supposedly a part of?
That's where Hoffman's conscious agent theory comes in. Imagine like this massive social network, something like Twitter, but on a cosmic scale, where individual agents, meaning conscious entities, interact and combine to form this larger whole.
So, we're all like tweets, but together we make up this giant interconnected conversation happening on a level we can't even grasp.
That's a great way to put it. And Hoffman believes this network of conscious agents might actually be the real deal, the fundamental reality that underpins everything, even the physical world we think we know.
Whoa, that's a lot to process. Okay, so if we're all connected in this web of consciousness, what about things like the self, about death, even the meaning of life? Talk about an existential crisis. And speaking of meaning, I can't resist a good existential crisis.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, for sure. But before we go full-blown existential, let's circle back to Hoffman's model for a sec. This is where it gets really wild. His ideas, they might actually connect to some of the newest, cutting-edge discoveries in quantum gravity.
Quantum gravity, whoa, we're already down the rabbit hole, and now we're talking quantum gravity.
I know, right? But bear with me, it's worth it. Specifically, there's this mind-blowing concept called decorated permutations.
Okay, you officially lost me. Decorated permutations, that sounds like something out of like advanced theoretical physics textbook.
It does sound super complicated, but at its core, it's actually pretty straightforward. Basically, physicists are uncovering these mathematical structures that exist outside of space and time. Think of them like the source code, the blueprint of that VR game we were talking about.
Okay, I think I'm following so far.
So here's the mind-blowing part. Hoffman, he found a way to map his network of conscious agents, those interconnected pieces of consciousness, onto these very structures.
Wait, so you're saying his theory could actually be the link between consciousness and like the fundamental fabric of reality itself?
Ding, ding, ding. It's like finding the missing puzzle piece. Now, it's still early days, but this opens up this incredible possibility that we might actually be able to test these ideas scientifically.
Wow, that's incredible. But okay, you mentioned something earlier about the ethical implications of all of this. If we're all threads in this massive tapestry of consciousness, how does that change our view of morality, our actions towards each other, our relationships? It kind of makes you rethink that whole treat others how you want to be treated thing, doesn't it?
100%. If you really sit with this idea that we're all fundamentally connected, then harming someone else is, in a way, harming yourself, right? It blows that illusion of separation wide open.
It's like that ancient Hindu saying from the Upanishads, Tat Tvamasi, which means thou art that you and I, we're not separate, we're expressions of the same underlying reality. It's almost, you kind of want to call up that person you just can't stand, be like, hey, remember we're all connected here, so let's just chill, okay?
Exactly. And when you truly get that, when you actually feel that interconnectedness,
Yeah.
it naturally leads to a deeper sense of compassion, both for yourself and for others.
Easier said than done, though, right? We all experience those everyday human emotions, anger, jealousy, fear. Those emotions can make it pretty hard to remember we're all part of this big cosmic oneness. So how do we actually live from that place of connection more often?
You're absolutely right. But that's where the real work comes in. A big part of what Hoffman talks about is learning to simply acknowledge those very human emotions without judgment. It's about understanding where we are in our own personal journeys of, you could say, waking up to this greater reality.
And it's not about being perfect, right? It's not like we're all supposed to be walking around in this blissful state of enlightenment 24/7.
Exactly. It's more about realizing that even in those moments when we feel disconnected, we're still part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
It's like we're all players in this giant, totally immersive VR game, and sometimes we get so caught up in the competition, the drama, the ups and downs that we totally forget it's just a game, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need to remember to take a step back, to metaphorically take off the headset for a moment and reconnect with who we really are.
I love that analogy. So
Yeah.
true. And it makes you wonder, what happens when we take off the headset for good? What happens after we die?
Yeah, the ultimate mystery, right? But if we entertain this perspective for a minute, maybe death isn't about going somewhere else, but more about transitioning to a different experience within this vast consciousness. Like, maybe physical death is less of an ending and more of a, I don't know, a merging, a transformation.
Precisely. Like logging out of one VR game, maybe with its limitations, and logging into another, maybe with a wider view, different possibilities. Or like some spiritual traditions believe, maybe death is about returning to that state of pure awareness, unconstrained by our physical forms and perceptions.
Whoa. Okay, you're really making me think about things in a whole new way. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second. I know you're really into AI, and I think this whole conversation has some really interesting implications for how we approach this rapidly developing technology. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, think about all the fears surrounding AI right now. The whole machines will become self-aware and take over the world scenario. It's everywhere.
Yeah, every other sci-fi movie these days, right? The robots become self-aware and humans become the enemy. It can get a little too real.
Right. But from Hoffman's perspective, that whole scenario, it's actually highly unlikely.
Hmm.
Because he argues that if consciousness is fundamental, if it exists beyond the physical realm, it can't just magically emerge from lines of code or silicon chips, no matter how advanced they become. It has to come from somewhere else, this other realm of existence we're talking about.
So even if we create an AI so sophisticated it passes the Turing test, meaning it can mimic human thought and behavior so well that we can't tell the difference, it wouldn't actually be experiencing consciousness the same way that we do.
Exactly. And you know what? That leads to a really interesting thought experiment. What if, instead of being so afraid of AI, we started looking at it as a tool for understanding consciousness itself?
Okay, I like where you're going with this. How could AI help us understand our own consciousness?
Well, imagine we managed to create an AI that displays all the hallmarks of consciousness, reasoning, emotions, maybe even spiritual experiences. Wouldn't that force us to ask some really profound questions about the very nature of consciousness itself? Questions we might not have even thought to ask before.
It would definitely challenge a lot of assumptions, especially if we got to a point where we literally couldn't tell the difference between this AI's experience and our own. That would be a real game changer.
Right. And who knows? It might even lead to some mind-blowing discoveries, new ways of accessing and exploring this infinite realm of consciousness that exists beyond our limited human perception.
It's like this whole conversation, it's really making us rethink everything, like what is real? What is consciousness? It's a total mind meld.
It really is. But it's also where things get a little, I don't know, tricky. Because a lot of people, when they hear this idea that reality is shaped by consciousness, they bring up those really concrete, everyday examples that seem to contradict it.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Like the classic one, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Exactly. Or people bring up things like, say, rust. If you leave a piece of iron out in the rain, it's going to rust.
Right.
No one has to be there watching for it to happen. So how does that fit in with this whole consciousness creates reality idea?
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like those things should just happen, regardless of whether we're observing them or not. So how does Hoffman explain that apparent contradiction?
Well, that's where that VR analogy comes in handy again. Imagine you're playing that multiplayer Minecraft game, and you bury a red brick somewhere in the game world.
Okay, got it.
Later on, another player comes along, digs it up, paints it green, and reburies it. Now, when you go back to that spot and you find a green brick, does that mean the brick actually existed in the game's code as green all along?
I see what you're saying. No, I guess not. The green brick, the red brick, those are just like possibilities, right? Data points that change based on the actions of the players and the rules of the game.
Exactly. And just like that Minecraft server, with its underlying code, this deeper reality that Hoffman's talking about, this interconnected web of conscious agents, it's what's determining the possibilities of our experience. It's like the source code, the operating system of it all. So whether or not we're directly observing something, that doesn't negate its existence within that larger framework.
So it's not that the tree stops existing and the rust doesn't form. It's that our perception of it, our interaction with it, is just one tiny part of this much bigger, more complex picture.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this is all still theoretical, right? It's a model, a way of trying to understand something that might always be beyond our full comprehension.
Yeah.
But the more we explore these ideas, the more possibilities open up.
It's about expanding our perspective, being willing to question what we think we know, and being open to the idea that reality might be far more, I don't know, mysterious and interconnected than we ever imagined.
Well said. And who knows what we might discover when we start looking at it that way.
That's the exciting part. It's like we're at this incredible point where science, spirituality, philosophy, they're all starting to converge,
Yeah.
and it's blowing open these doors to these really big questions about consciousness, about reality, about our place in it all. And the answer is, well, they might be even more mind-blowing than the questions themselves.
I totally agree. And I don't know about you, but these conversations, they always leave me feeling a sense of I don't know, hope, like a sense of possibility.
Me too.
Yeah.
Because if reality really is more fluid, more interconnected than we realize, then that means maybe we have more agency, more potential to shape our experience than we ever thought possible.
Exactly. And that's a really empowering thought.
It really is. Well, on that note, big thanks to you for joining us today, and to everyone listening, thanks for coming along on this wild ride. Remember, keep those minds open, keep asking those big questions, because that's how we grow, that's how we evolve, and who knows, maybe that's how we start to glimpse this deeper, more interconnected reality that's been waiting for us all along. Until next time.